Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another KeyShot webinar series. Today we will be talking to Dries, and he will be showing us his amazing animations and how he did them. If you have been following us on the forums, you will be no stranger to Dries with his awesome rendering skills and animations. So without further ado, Dries, you want to go ahead and start the webinar?
Okay, thanks, Sean. I hope everyone's doing well. So my name is Dries Vervoort, and I'll be your guest presenter for today's KeyShot webinar. So as Sean said, it will be focused entirely on animations. And when Rick Sean asked me to do a webinar, I decided to do animations. And maybe it's good to tell me beforehand that I won't be doing a straight from scratch animation to finalized product, but I'm going over the animation that I made for the recent KeyShot Toon Render Challenge, and I'll be sharing some of my tips and tricks and some of the thought that went into the process of making the actual animation. So I realize an hour is not too much, so let's just dive into KeyShot animations. Maybe some of you guys have seen this thing on the forum, as Sean said. This is the main character of my animation. I've set up some of the basic animations that you can have within KeyShot. So really, animations in KeyShot are quite simple to set up, as there are few types that you can set, but you can use them to get really quite extraordinary results. So the animations you have in KeyShot can be applied to both geometry, to objects within your scene, and to an active camera. So the animations that you have available within KeyShot for the objects are firstly a turntable. So this does a simple turning of the model within your scene. Secondly, you have translation, which is going to move your model in either X, Y, or Z direction. And thirdly, you have rotation, which will rotate your model around a pivot point, which is set automatically by the software, or which you can choose by using a helper object. It can be set in degrees. You can choose the axis of rotation, and the nice thing about it is that it updates all in real time. So as my animation is playing back, I am actually seeing the effect of the axis that I change, or if I change degrees, it's all being considered in real time. Then for camera animations, it should play back. So for camera, you can do an orbit, which is simply a camera that is going to go around your object. You have very simple controls. There is only a degree control. So if you want only a quarter movement of your camera, you can set that. Next up is inclination animation. This is going to move your camera upwards. Just as with orbit, you can set the degrees you want the camera to move up. Then you have zoom, which is simply moving the camera forwards or backwards. So you can type in a distance. This is with the units you set for your scene. So I have this now at 325 millimeters. You can also type in negative values for each of the animation values. So now I have a zoom out. And just as with all animation types, it updates interactively, and I can immediately see the effect of all the values I typed in. And the last animation type for camera is translation. And in the Z direction it works mostly like a zoom, but you can also apply translations on other axes, so it's a bit more flexible than zoom. Yeah. Of course, for each animation type you have a setting for motion easing, which can be set to either one of four, which is linear, which is constant velocity motion. You have easing in, which is going to start slowly and then move faster as the animation passes. Ease out is the opposite, and ease in out is a combination of ease in and ease out. So yeah, that's basically a very basic overview of the animations that are available within KeyShot. If you want to know more about specific settings or about how to apply individual animations, I would happily refer to the tutorial section on the KeyShot website. You'll find under resources and learning tutorials, you're going to find a section about applying animations. So anything you want to know about motion easing, basic things about part translations, rotations, what the settings are actually doing, you find in this section. Most of these movies have been made at the time of the initial release of KeyShot 3, so they are a bit outdated, I think, but most of the basic concepts do still apply to KeyShot 4. There have been no additional animation types going from version 3 to version 4. So this covers the very basics. So I think you have a very nice overview of what types are available, and I think now I'm going to go a bit further and expand on how I went about creating my Toon Challenge animation. Just playing this back. So this is a basic motion that I have applied lots of times in my animation, my final animation, and I've opened this up to show that the rotation animation is the one with the hardest settings to set up, especially because of the pivot point. The pivot point is something that you really need to consider while modeling, and I'll just show you why. It's important to really know how you're going to animate and what you're animating, even when you're modeling before going to KeyShot. So what it is actually doing now is apparently this ball is moving across the surface of this wheel. But as I zoom out of my scene and I hide the wheel, you're seeing that my avatar, my character, is actually pivoting around a reference cube that I've put into an assembly together with the avatar, with my character. So what I have within the settings of the rotation animation that is causing the character to move from one side to the other is that I have for my pivot point, I have picked in my scene this reference cube, and I set it to origin because I've modeled it with the origin centered right in that cube. So when I play it back, it swivels around this point. Now using an external pivot point does have a benefit when you want flexibility, so that when I go moving this thing, you see that actually the rotation of my character is being influenced by how I move this. So you see in real time this updates pretty nicely. So it does give you some flexibility. Now, one area where this didn't work very well was where I wanted my avatar to move sideways but also stay upright. And if you're using an helper object to rotate, if you want your model to rotate around an helper object, but also rotate around itself with a different animation, you'll notice that it won't work very nicely as such. So let me check. So this is what I actually wanted to achieve, and this was something that was not being handled correctly in my previous scene. So you see that my character is moving left or right, and that at the same time the up axis is being vertical all the time. So let me explain how I set this up in KeyShot. So you see that for one sideways movement of my character, I have two animations. I have this rotate avatar to left 15 degrees, as well as this one, the avatar upright 15 degrees. And I can toggle this off, so that the top rotation is making my character move sideways, and this next animation, this next rotation, is keeping my character upright. So you can see the difference if I toggle this on and off. And the way I made this work was by modeling my avatar, my character in SolidWorks, while considering how I was going to animate it. And for my sideways movement, instead of using a reference cube that I have as an extra piece of geometry in my scene. I have actually made an assembly consisting of my character as well as the reference cube. So the difference is that I'm now animating the entire assembly of pivot object and avatar. And when I did it like this, I was able to put an additional animation on the character alone. So when I go into my scene tree structure, you have the avatar, and you see that this is a group consisting of my avatar object, my character, and there is this pivot object. So let me just open the last one. So you see the difference more clearly here. The character, the avatar, and the pivot helper object are two separate objects in my scene. And when I go animating thing, you see that my pivot helper object is not animated at all. It's just being used as a reference object, but it is always in the same position and its rotation never changes along with my character. And this is a problem when you apply an animation using the pivot point as well as an extra animation on your object. So that's one thing to consider. So here's I've opened up one of my booby trap sections that I used in animation in SolidWorks, which is my main modeling tool, and I'll use this to show the benefit of considering making coinciding pivot points and origins in your CAD data. So what you have here are basically cards that are riding across the curved track. So of course in SolidWorks I have the ability to mate my wheels and to make all kinds of mating relations, but these of course don't transfer directly or don't transfer at all into KeyShot. So in KeyShot, if I want to emulate this movement, I will have to make sure I can pick a correct pivot point, or that I put my origin in my CAD data at the pivot point, or that my pivot point coincides with the origin. So how this looks in CAD. So when I look at it in CAD, you see that my assembly origin is right in the center of the arc of this this object. So what this means is that when I open this section in KeyShot, which I will do right away. I've set it up already for you guys. So when I open this in KeyShot, and I've already applied several animations, and if I play this back, you see that this is doing exactly the motions that I intended as I had set them up in SolidWorks. And instead of using pivot points, and because I had modeled my cards in such a way that my origin was in the pivot point location, I can just use no helper object at all and use the origin as a pivot point. So this makes setting up the animation in KeyShot much simpler, because if I wouldn't have put the origin in the correct place while modeling, I would have needed 3 separate helper objects as pivot points, because as you can see, my track is curved, so I would need 3 separate pivot points to get the whole thing animated like it should. So really taking care of proper modeling and putting your pivot points at the origin really makes animating more complex scenes much simpler, because this is now only one track section, but in my animation I'm actually using 10 of these sections with at least 10 animations applied to each of them. So it's definitely worthwhile to consider consider what you're going to do in an animation while you're modeling. Got another example of this right here, where I've done some eye animation. So as I play this back, you can see the eyes are closing, moving. I have set up several animations for this. I have an animation to close the eyelids. I have one to open them back. I have one to rotate the eyeballs with the eyelids, and several others, center them back. So just as I did with the track section, for these eyelids I have modeled them in such a way that the origin for the eyelids are right in the center of my eyes, and if I want to apply the correct rotation animation to them to close them, I can just pick origin as pivot point and change nothing about helper object. So if this were all modeled as a multi-body part, for instance, where you have only one origin, for example, in the center of this object, it would look, you would need to import or model a pivot point where you would refer the pivot point that you would use for all the eyelid movements. But this is not any problem at all if you're taking care of proper origin location within your modeling software. So yeah. Another thing I'm going to show is the benefit of working with folders and proper grouping of animations. So how I went about creating my animation was actually, as draft versions, I worked on my separate sections, just to find out if maybe I missed something in the modeling, or if just to filter out some mistakes before I went into my final animation. So I set up the animations that I wanted to apply to the individual sections. So these are all animations that I simply applied, set the correct axis, set the right degrees that I got from my CAD software, obviously, and just put the pivot point in a region, and it behaves just as I intended in CAD. Now the neat thing about KeyShot animations is that they can be transferred to a new scene by importing, just as you can import cameras as well. So I can put these animations that I have here in a folder. So this is trap number 4. Can save this out, close this down, maybe open this one. So this is the scene I showed just a few moments ago. So if I'm happy with this, I can select all my animations, add them to a folder as well. So this is going to be booby trap number 7. You can save this out, close it down, and save. So I can open a new KeyShot scene and then go importing the scenes I just saved. So I do an import of my bib and don't import cameras. Yeah. Do another import of the other bib I saved. So what you're seeing now is that after importing scenes that have animations applied to them, these animations are actually retained upon importing. So I think that's a very neat way of working. So you can, if you prefer working in simpler scenes with simpler scene trees, with not massive amounts of geometry, just to keep things clean and simple, I think this is a pretty good way of working. So yeah, you can really work the timeline. You can time your animations, and all the animations that you had in the scenes that you used to import are actually retained, even their their names are retained, the relative position, the duration, your pivot points, your easing in and out, everything is just as it was in the original scenes. So that's really a benefit of working also with these folders. So if you group them together, you get a much tidier way of working within your scene and with your animations, because when you have all these blue and green bars, it can become quite frustrating to work in, especially if you have many animations. As I will show you my final animation scene in a few moments, you will see that there is really a benefit in keeping things organized. Yeah. So yeah, also if I play this back, so yeah, just made a mistake there, but you can see you can very dynamically move your things around. You can toggle animations on and off. So it's a very interactive process. Yeah. And of course, when you put things, animations in a folder, you can make them go faster, you can make them go slower, just by changing the length of your folder bar. So if you make it really long, your animations go much slower. If you make it really short, your animations will go very fast. But the relation between all the animations is actually retained. So next up, I've set up this this animation, and I'm just going to play it back. So what's happening is it's doing an orbit around the character. It gets swapped by another character with a different color. There's another orbit. Then it gets swapped yet by another character. It does an orbit again. So what I'm actually doing here is hiding objects from my scene, because I'm orbiting around and my previous character is not showing up anymore. So I will zoom out and then play it again, and you notice what happens. So it does an orbit, then it comes another character popping up. So I'm using a technique to unhide objects from my scene, and now I'll talk a bit about how you can go about this. So what I'm using in this scene to my advantage is the ground plane that was introduced in KeyShot 4, and as you might have noticed, there is this clip geometry below ground option for the ground material. So a very simple way to adding a ground plane in your scene is by going to Edit and Add Ground Plane. So that will add your ground plane. push the size. So you can clip geometry below ground. And I'm actually going to show how it looks like without the clipping option enabled. So I play it back. There you see flashing by my hidden, as you will, objects. So what you're seeing here is the character I've hidden underneath my ground plane to make it invisible while I'm orbiting the second character. So as I enable the clipping below ground option, you're seeing what this is actually doing. Now I have clipping off. Clipping on. So yeah, going to zoom out again. There I am. So let me go over this process from start to finish. So what is happening is my first animation is putting my third and my second character, putting below the ground plane to make them invisible. Then is there the orbiting and the zoom on the camera, and then I resurface my second character and I put the translation on my first and my second character to swap them in my camera view, and I put my first one underneath the ground plane again, and then do again the same camera action, and then actually repeat this process for my third one. So I resurface my third character, swap my second with my third, and put the second one below ground, and again do an orbit and a zoom. So the plane is back, zoomed out. I think the effect is best appreciated this way. So yeah, I think it's a pretty cool way to very basically hide unhide geometry from your scene when you're doing camera animations, when you want only one object in view at a time. So yeah, it's really using the clip geometry below ground function with the ground plane yeah, in a creative way, I think. One way I used this in my animation is to have credits. Move out of sight. So let me play this back. So this is the starting point of my animation. So credits come rolling from above, move to the side, do an orbit, and the credits are out of view. So if I zoom out again from this point, yeah, so it moves to the side and then it gets hidden underneath my ground plane. So yeah, I'm doing a very quick translation just to hide it there. So going to do a playback again with the clipping option off. Put it back on. There you have it. You have credits that roll in, and you use the ground plane with the clipping option to hide your credits underneath. You could of course do credits and all this sort of stuff in editing software or afterwards in After Effects, but I tend to like to do most of my animation work within KeyShot, just as that swapping action I just did before this. You can render out separate animations and stitch them together inside any compositing tool, but I like to do as much as I can in a single shot or in a single animation rendering. So it's basically my way of working. So it's my animation. Now I'm going to open up my final animation scene that I built for the challenge, just to show how most of what I just said culminated in my challenge scene. So this scene is pretty heavy on the memory side, so I hope the performance will be smooth enough for you guys to make sense of it. So yeah, so you can see my animation timeline, my tree here. I've put in lots of folders just to keep things organized, because as you'll see, when I expand my animations, you're seeing lots of separate animations, and I really use the folders to keep myself organized. So I have lots of animations. And actually all the rotations for the booby traps, as you can see here, I have rotating laser guns. So all of these rotations have been applied without having helper objects. It takes a bit more time to get things right inside the CAD software, but it is a tremendous help in KeyShot when you can just apply a rotation movement to a part and not having to worry about picking a helper object, because well, I will actually show you guys. I have this rotation movement, and if I would have to pick a pivot point, I would have to dive into this massive scene tree. So I would really have to, I would have to know what section I'm working in. I would have to know what assembly I should pick. It gets quite bothersome if you have to do maybe 200 of those rotation animations. what's also nice is that you can use folders inside folders. So for any major section I had, I have used folders for my booby trap action, which is the animation that I apply to my wheel, and then I have a separate folder for the animations that I applied to my character, and another folder for the animations that I had on my active camera. So that really enables you to keep things organized. So as I go to section 9, as I toggle these animations off, you're still retaining the animations on my character and on my camera, and yeah, you can really use the folders and the option to toggle folders on and off to your advantage in more complex scenes. Yeah. So when I go back to the beginning of my animation right here, so you're seeing credits being flown in from all sides right here, and then these credits move to the side because of my camera animation, and then as my camera orbits further, you'll see that my credits have disappeared. So this is really the trick that I did with pulling my credits down underneath a ground plane with clipping enabled. So yeah, that was a very quick overview of what I did to accomplish this animation. I don't know if any of you guys have seen my definite version of my animation. Maybe I should play it back, or maybe I should upload it to the forums. You should be able already to see it there. For any of you who haven't seen it yet, but yeah, I'm running out of time to go any further. I would have liked to explain a bit more my scene in detail, but if there's any interest to see what setup I made for my final scene that you're seeing now, I'm always willing to actually share my scene with you. If there's enough interest, just yeah, let me know, send me a mail or something, and I'll share my KeyShot package with you so you can check out what I did. Yeah. So thanks for listening.